You're kind of quiet, so I'm gonna turn my desktop audio so that you'll be heard better on the stream. And not particularly different. So I'm going to share my screen with you so that you don't have to watch the stream for the visual portion. So before we go into everything, like to talk about it like live, could you just give me sort of like an idea? You said you don't feel very confident like in your ability to draft, but can you sort of like elaborate on what that means? Okay. Mhm. Mhm. Okay. I mean, that's already a pretty rational start. Like, not gonna lie. We're gonna build on top of that a little bit and dig into some of the reasons why you're doing, like, making some of the choices you are. But that's a pretty good starting place. So I think it's oh, you should be able to hear Lynn now, I think. And so let's sort of take the ideas of like drafting and lay them out like in an order, and then we'll cover them in an order. That sounds good to you?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay. So first of all, we need to cover the sort of like the very basic theory about like, you know, what is a good draft? What are your goals in draft? That kind of shit, right?
Yeah.
We'll talk about pick order. We'll talk about um, what's the word? Like player specific ideas. And then at the end, we'll talk about analysis because there are some really helpful tools for analyzing drafts that have already happened that will help you make better decisions about future drafts. So, dumb question. What should your goals be when you draft?
Um, Honestly, I think it depends on it depends on what you want for the game, like what kind of comp you want to run.
Mm-hmm.
But like when I'm drafting, I try to get like I like as a jungler, I I try to get at least one pushing lane in order to like if you have no pushing lanes, like at least one pushing lane, like two or three would be good. But if you have no pushing lanes, then you can't invade, you can't you can't get scuttles, you can't get like drakes. You have no early pressure, and so if the enemy jungle decides to invade with their bot lane, after the bot lane just pushes into the turret, you're just screwed. Like you just they just take your jungle. You have to find something else to do on the map, but like that if it's that or like if you take your top side, you clear your top side, you go to bot side, and then the enemy jungle invades with their bot lane,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing else to take on the map, and so
Okay.
like you just get screwed. And so like that's like baseline is like I want to draft at least one lane with prio.
Mm. It's good that you clarify pushing versus prio. I like this.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, not pushing prio. Sorry.
no, no, you're good. Um, when we are looking at this, have you heard me talk about tempo before?
No.
Okay. What is tempo? Really quickly. We'll go through it. Yeah.
Um.
You've heard other people talk about it, right?
Yeah. Just like I don't know. Like the are you talking like specifically like lane tempo?
No, I'm talking about tempo, the general concept.
Okay. Just like the speed of the game, I would say, like how quickly things are happening, or like tempo, uh, like who it can be like one team has tempo because they made a couple good plays, and then it's like this like you can snowball that. So if tempo's on your side, it's easier to snowball. Is kind of how I think of it. I don't know if that's right, but
Let's recontextualize it. When I say tempo, I'm referring to something a little bit more like calculable, something that you can actually work with. It's a quantity, like time, that you can spend doing a thing. So when you asked about lanes, they're the easier one to talk about than jungle, but we can talk about tempo in terms of jungle as well. Like a laner would have tempo, a certain amount of time to do something. For example, if they crash a wave, and so they won't be missing golden experience during the period of time that the wave is under the opponent's tower.
okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then like in the jungle, it would be like your pathing, like you have to take your camps like at a certain amount of time, and like if you leave camps up on the other side, then you're missing golden experience.
That would be the most natural equivalent, but when we talk about tempo in the jungle, a lot of the time we're talking more about making the decision that has the smallest opportunity cost, as opposed to just focusing on clearing. Because there will be a
Okay,
lot of times where a really good jungler will not clear perfectly because the opportunity cost of clearing perfectly is greater than the opportunity cost of like counter yanking or creating a dive or taking a neutral, something like that. You see what I mean?
yeah, yeah, that doesn't make sense.
So when you talk about having at least one lane with prio, you're saying that you want one lane with prio because you want the ability to generate tempo.
Yes, yes,
And so I wanted to take what you said and then for our checklist, right, our goals, we want to generate tempo. So good. Your idea is like your starting idea is in the right place. What
good.
else?
Um, I would say another like main goal is you want to draft champions that work well together with good synergies, and like you need to have a goal of what you want to draft in mind, whether you want to do like a poke comp, or if you want to do a dive comp, or if you want to do a peel comp or a re-engage comp. Like you have to have some idea of what you want to do going into the draft. Obviously, like it can change during the draft based on what the other team drafts, but and this is something like you kind of figure out what works well for your team over time. Like you need to play together a couple times and try like different comps out to figure that out. But you want to have like some idea of what you want to do as like with the draft, with the comp and everything.
I understand where you're coming from. I'm trying to think about how I want to respond. So I don't disagree that it's important to have an idea of how your composition is going to function in terms of like win condition, and that your draft should be synergistic to that win condition. But I sort of hesitate to agree that a team should specifically have like a very hyper focused playstyle in mind at the start, as opposed to a sort of generalized idea of where their pools are and like what win conditions can be built from that so that they can be drafted towards that. So, for example, let's say you have a top laner who's mechanically proficient, but they don't talk and they are a bit of a person who doesn't watch the mini map. Um, so a player like that is really conducive to multiple different playstyles, right? You can put them in situations where they play like a Jax champion and just split perma and never group with their team and like draw pressure, but they need jungle resources early. Or you can put them on a champion like a Kled champion who's similar to Jax, but the focus is less on creating pressure on towers and more drawing someone to a lane and then collapse, like winning team fights. That maybe Camille would be a better example of this just because people actually play that champion. And so with this like limited example, you have like, only one player that we're taking into consideration, right? But we've opened up the idea of two different win conditions that are both in line with what that player would want to do. And I think being aware of like all of your options and drafting towards those options in specific is good, right? Like you don't want to stick this guy on Malphite because he's just going to die over and over again. But restricting it too much is a similar mistake to putting him on champions that he's not going to succeed with. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
So, what I would say is for the idea of like compositional synergy and like player pool awareness, let's in addition to being able to generate tempo because nobody wants to be the team that has like Orin, Azir, Kindred, XC, you know what I mean? Um,
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
say that being aware of win conditions, like a pool of win conditions for your team, and drafting towards that would be the second goal, where we're not specifically focusing on one idea, although some teams in lower elo will, because the only way that they're going to play the game and win is to draft like wombo combo team fight and just overlap
yeah.
ultimates. You see that a lot
Hmm.
in IBS, but I don't think it's super relevant outside of IBS.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's good. Like that makes a lot of sense to me.
Cool. There's one more thing that we need. It's like a sub checklist, actually. It's sort of like think of this as like things that every composition requires, regardless of their win condition and their player pool and whether or not they generate tempo.
Okay. Is wave clear one of them?
Wave clear is one of them. Good job.
Peel.
Um, we'll put that on the back burner for now. Like CC may
Okay.
be something that we're looking for, but we're looking for very generic levels of like wave clear is like wave clear doesn't even tell you anything about the champion that has it, right? Like that champion could be Akshan or it could be Zeroth or it could be like
Yeah.
Fiora depending on the game.
I mean, I guess like just damage.
Okay, can you be a little bit more specific about the damage?
You need. I would say like you need AP and AD damage.
Good, mixed
You need
damage
like
is
a.
one of the items.
Yes. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Mixed damage. Um. I would say like tank.
Like a frontline.
Like yeah, front line. Yeah.
So we'll put frontline
That.
for now, but we'll come back to it. How about that?
Yeah. Like I don't think like you necessarily like absolutely need it is the thing. Like it can be good in a lot of instances, but
Mm-hmm.
like some comps can run without it.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you can think of?
Um, I'm kind of blanking now.
Okay, let's say that you're in a game and you've picked um all burst champions, and your opponent has 2 tanks. Can you see a problem with that?
Yeah, yeah.
So what would that problem be?
Sustained damage.
Deeps.
Yeah,
Sustained damage is sorry. In my head, I think of these in particular terms. The way that you're saying things isn't wrong. It's just that's how I think of them.
yeah.
Make
Oh
sense?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I understand. Yeah.
Cool. And I'm thinking there's probably one more thing that's good to keep in mind. And this is a little bit of a less commonly talked about concept, so if it doesn't come to you, it's okay. But take a stab at it anyway.
Yeah, I'm blanking again.
You need ranged champions.
Oh yeah, yeah. That makes sense.
And this is a relative thing. So, for example, if your opponent's largest ranged champion is like Rakan or something, then it's not like you need Zeroth to like make up for it. But generally speaking, you're going to want your composition, regardless of the win condition or like their ability to generate tempo in laning phase, you're going to want your composition to have the ability to interact with the enemy team before they start things.
Yeah,
So let's come back to frontline and deeps and mixed damage. These are required no matter what, but these three are actually sort of like you can make decisions during draft about how important they are. Um, and generally speaking, what you're going to see is that if you have enough DPS, maybe mixed damage isn't so important. Maybe if you have a bunch of mixed damage and they're not particularly tanky, you don't need as much DPS. Maybe if the entire enemy team is all tanks and you have a large amount of sustain that doesn't come from frontline champions, you're going to find that you don't need frontline as much.
yeah,
But the idea is that these things should be things that you consider more so than that you make sure that you have them every time as you're putting your draft together. That
yeah.
all makes
That makes
sense?
yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. So now that we have this idea, right? That our composition is balanced, that's what we'll call that conglomerate checklist. That it can generate tempo and that it plays to a win condition where we as a team are able to play. Let's talk about sort of how you do that with your team in specific, right? Not necessarily like a team that you're playing on, but just like you have 5 players and they can do certain things and they can play certain champions. How do you go from those pools of champions to drafts like this every time? The first thing you do is you look at what they play and you identify win conditions that each player is likely going to be able to play towards. So, in our example from before, we had that like split oriented player. Like their mechanics really allow them to play a lane, then draw pressure, either like split style or collapse style, as long as they're being told when to collapse by another player. I can spell words, don't worry. So when you're building a team, generally you're going to want to keep these things in mind as you choose your players, right? Um, but sometimes you'll end up in a position where your team is assembled for you, and you don't have much choice in like what the players are good at, and you'll probably have to make compromises. Those teams tend to do less well. Um, just straight up how it is. All this is making sense so far.
Yes, yes. All this makes sense.
So if you have a top laner like this is our example top laner. This isn't necessarily like how it is for everyone. What kind of jungler would you want to have, for example?
I would like to have like an engaged jungler because if that's the case, I would want a strong uh like 4v4. Like I want a strong team fight with the 4 others if one is going to be splitting a lot of the game.
Okay, there's something else that sticks out to me that you would really like your jungler to have. This is not wrong. This is true. But there's another idea that we want.
I'm not thinking of anything.
You'd want a jungler who's I call them bridge picks. Do you know what that means?
No.
So a bridge pick player is a player who picks a champion whose goal is to get the team from the early game to the mid game without them falling behind. So some good bridge pick junglers are like Jarvan or Rek'Sai, where their late game is sort of dubious. They still contribute, but they're not like insanely good at it. But in the early game, they set up lanes that might otherwise not necessarily create advantages or would be vulnerable to other teams trying to prey on them when they do try to create advantages. And then they use that power to get those lanes into the right place.
Okay. Yeah,
Like a
that makes
literal
sense.
bridge between the early and mid game. That's why they're called bridge picks. Um, and so I would really like to have a bridge jungler if I'm going to have a top laner like this, because they're going to make it so that our top laner is able to play the game in a way that they would want to play. It all makes sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
As for the bot side, can you take some stabs as to what you might be wanting from those players?
Um. Yeah. Well, you need some form of wave clear.
Mm-hmm.
Um. Ideally from ADC and mid lane, but if not both, at least one.
Why do you feel like both are required to have wave clear, or not required but preferred?
Uh. Just because more wave clear is always better in my opinion.
Interesting.
Like I just like having two ways to do it instead of just one because um and also like you said like another example is like 1-3-1, so like you could draft a wave clear in the bot lane and then have a mid laner who can also side lane and split push,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which is another option.
So if I'm looking at this specifically, I'm probably preferring my wave clearer to be my mid laner. This is not necessarily how it has to be, but I'll explain why. It's fine to set up 1-3-1 like you suggested, especially if you're running with a bridge jungler. So this isn't the only way to do things. But it's a lot easier to play the game if you take that pressure off of your jungler a little bit and you have a wave clear mid, because that allows them to either bolster cross map plays if your jungler is looking to support a player that you're looking to play through, or it allows your jungler to go for plays empowered by the idea that the mid laner can also come. Generally speaking, champions that look to 1-3-1 from the mid lane are not going to have early wave clear options just because um, their scaling dueling ability like is at the cost of having that early wave clear. So you'll see champions like Echo or Zed who they can clear the wave clear fine, but then they don't have cooldowns. They end up getting engaged on if they try to actually move too early in the game. Um, and in this way, we're we're empowering the win conditions that we're looking at, as opposed to spreading ourselves thin. It makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
As for AD carry support role, um, in the case of the top lane, generally you're gonna want a weak side AD, right? Because you're going to find that you're going to want to send resources to upside more often to enable a player like this if they're like incapable of playing other styles.
Yeah.
And so having a weak side AD gives you options in your support position, right? You can have like an helicopter sort of gank squad with mid jungle, or you can have a like an anti-dive support that transitions into secondary engage later in the game. And so that as like one example, you see how we haven't picked any champions, right? Like the pool doesn't matter yet, but we've
Yeah.
already sort of like eyed in a win condition and how we're going to look to play through it, regardless of what pools are.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's sort of like step two when it comes to like designing a team to do certain ideas when it comes to draft. So before we talk about individual champions and players like proficiency with champions and stuff, let's talk about pick order, okay?
Okay.
So blue side and red side have some distinct advantages, and depending on the meta, one of them will be better than the other. Are you familiar with any of the advantages of either side?
Yeah. So blue, you get first pick, and if in the current meta there's like one champion in a role that's like super strong, or even if like your top laner or mid laner has one champion that they're really good at, then getting first pick can be a big advantage.
Okay,
On red side, you get the last pick, so you have the potential to counterpick a lane, which can help you win that lane.
okay. You have anything else for me?
Um, not really. Those
Okay,
are kind of the only things I think about when I think about the two sides while drafting.
okay. So blue side also has two pairs of picks. And what that means is you have opportunities to pick duo synergies uninterrupted. Where red only has just red 1, 2. So this is why when you see like drafts go through, a lot of the time you'll see on blue side, when the meta allows it, jungle on 1, AD carry support 2, 3, or flexes 2, 3. The idea being that you're getting synergies within your composition that allow you to do whatever it is your composition is supposed to do, and you're not giving your opponent an opportunity to interrupt that duo synergy pick. So, like when Xayah or Khan are really good, red side tends to be pretty strong because um, blue side doesn't necessarily want to blue one Xayah at the cost of jungle, but they also don't want to give red 1 2 Xayah or Khan, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So those synergies are actually very strong to keep in mind, but we don't tend to see them be used at our elo, so it's just something for the back of your mind.
Okay.
Something more pertinent is that red side is good at playing for dragons, and blue side is good at playing for Nash. What that means is scaling teamfighting compositions are really strong on blue side because you have access to power picks, you have access to more synergies, you have access to the Nash later easier. So you'll find that on blue side, when late game scaling is strong, when team fighting is strong, blue side tends to look stronger. Your guaranteed counter pick on red side means that you can weak side a top laner in a winning matchup, ignore them for the whole game, and play through dragons, using your red 1 2 for like priority on those dragons, and then use that to snowball games. So when the meta is shorter, you're going to see red side be stronger. When the meta has more power picks, you're going to see red side, depending on where those power picks are, also be stronger. When dragons are strong, you're going to see red side be stronger. And so that also plays into the idea of like what you're looking to pick on different sides. If you're
Okay.
not actively thinking about that during draft, that's okay. Because that it makes it sound like you're playing like Death Note or something instead of just the regular draft, but it
Yeah.
is something to be aware Any questions so far?
No, that makes sense. And I was also gonna say like the third pick, like you get to counter pick jungle a lot of the time on red side
Mm-hmm.
with the third pick, and so that also helps with early dragons.
Actually, on the topic of Red 3 is one of the most interesting picks in the draft, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's an R. Because Red 3 lets you pick whatever you want and then protect it with two bans.
Yes.
So it's one of the few times where it's actually okay to pick mid or top without necessarily losing the matchup, depending on the opponent's pool.
Yeah.
I personally really like drafting from red side, but a lot of the time blue side is stronger.
Yeah.
um, so with the idea of like different roles, right? You mentioned that you like to save counterpick for top lane because you find that top lane is the most affected by counterpick. And I agree that top lane is the matchup that is most likely to be decided before the game starts. But I want to challenge some of the logic behind why that should have impacted your draft, okay?
Okay.
So, top lane is the matchup that is most impacted by matchup, right?
Yeah.
The other one being mid. We're gonna give this sort of like, actually, you know what? I can format this in a better way. We're gonna give a matchup priority number to these roles, okay?
Okay.
And what the number means is that like having a winning matchup in this position, generically, not necessarily always, is going to provide you like the most value on a scale of 1 to 5. One being like the most, like it's the number one highest position, and number five being obviously like the matchup impacts the amount of priority you get from it the least, right?
Yeah.
So we can agree that jungle matchup is the least important because it's mostly determined by like jungle dueling in the matchup and then also your lane matchups, right?
Yes.
And we can agree that the bot lane position is more determined by support than the actual marksman, right?
Hmm.
Cool. So the rest of these three numbers, because there will be some metas where this is more actually relevant, but they're very rare, is determined by meta. So right now, and usually, top lane matters in that if you have a losing top lane matchup and the meta doesn't allow for you to pick a frontliner in top lane who doesn't require to win the matchup in order to be valuable, it will be a 1. But largely you'll find that unless you're at the highest echelon of play or you're in a meta where like it's literally not viable to pick a frontliner in the way that we're talking about, top lane matters less than mid lane does. And the reason for that is that mid lane is the laning jungler. They have control over tempo of the game in terms of like how tempo is being spent around the map, the second most compared to the jungler. Um, and you would like them to be able to exercise that, and that's most easy when they have that counterpick. It makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then support on occasion bot lane will matter so much because dragons matter so much and mid lane meta doesn't matter for counterpick that you'll pick it like first. But this doesn't happen very frequently. It's usually the third most important one.
Okay.
Just just because bot prio is often determined by jungle intervention more so than it is by wave control, which is why you can get to like plat diamond elo playing AD carry and not know how to control the wave correctly. Um,
Yeah.
and so with
Thanks for shouting out Giggle there.
oh, well, I mean, I wasn't commenting on any player in VAD in particular.
I know, just kidding.
um, but yeah, so basically, depending on your read on the meta, like right now, it makes a lot of sense to prioritize mid over top lane, just because there are so many frontline champions that are viable options, especially in our elo, where like matchup is less deterministic than it probably should be. Um, and so when we go into a draft, right? Like it doesn't matter as much. The other thing that we haven't talked about with regards to this priority order are flexes.
Yeah.
Flexes are your lifeblood. If your team can flex champions and you are not flexing champions, then you are griefing your team in draft. Um, for a couple of reasons, and I'm sure you already know a good amount about the strength of flexes. So why don't you talk to me about what makes them so good?
Um, if you have a flex pick, I mean, you can just lock it in early, and the other team doesn't know where it's going, and so especially like if you lock it in first round, they don't know what lane to ban out. They don't know who to ban. And so they'll either like ban one from each, or maybe they'll just choose one and just ban two champions from that. But if it's going to that lane, then those bans are just wasted. Yeah. And then it also makes it harder to get a counter pick in those lanes if you don't know where the flex pick is going, or picks. I mean, you could have like two flex picks
Mm-hmm.
in mid and top lane and could go either way. So yeah, I think that's about what I
Okay,
think that's about it.
so this is all good. And a lot of the time, this is all that we really get to work with in our elo because you'll have one player who's better at playing the flex champion than the other ones. Like maybe you flex Mordekaiser three ways, but your top laner is a Mordekaiser one trick, and your jungler and mid laner like they've played it ever. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So you'll find that assuming player level of the champion is equal is not something that you necessarily get to do. The other thing that you can do is if it doesn't look like a flex, you can, in addition to wasting bans and like making it hard to counter the champion that you're picking, you can also make them pick improperly, right?
yeah,
So maybe you're a Taric jungle abuser and you pick Taric in the normal Taric, like the normal support lock-in slot in draft. And your opponent sees, oh, they responded to my Morgana with Taric, kind of weird. I don't know why they would counterpick themselves, whatever. Um, and then when it comes to your sort of like 4 or 5 round, that mystery like unfolds for them. They're like, wait a minute, they didn't pick a jungle. What's going on? And so you can do sort of like psychological damage to players going into a game by drafting flex picks that are difficult to anticipate, in addition to the actual draft merits that come with flexes.
yeah,
And that sounds like a little bit weird to talk about, but a lot of the time, you'll find that people can become overconfident or they can become confused by things that they don't think are proper drafts because they don't understand what's happening. And if you can use that, it's just as much of an advantage as actual like good proper drafting in the first place.
yeah.
Cool. So let's talk about individual players, and we're going to talk about draft as though it's a card game. And if you've seen the Reapered video, it's very helpful. But that's not the only thing we're going to talk about with regards to draft as a card game. Um, have you heard of that before? The idea that draft is a card game?
I have, but I haven't like seen it actually in like action.
Okay,
I've just kind of heard of the idea. Yeah,
so let's treat every champion like it's a card, right? Here's our boy Atrox. And he's got like a couple of numbers at the bottom of his card, right?
yeah,
So one of those numbers is going to just be like the pure strength of the champion, right? Is the champion good right now? And that, of course, matters because you're not going to be picking Middle East support unless you're ADHD, right?
yeah,
Another thing that actually matters is how comfortable is your player on the champion? So if you're making somebody first time Atrox, it doesn't matter how strong they are, that player's going to run it down, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Champion's just straight up really hard to play. And that's actually our third value, is difficulty of execution. And this can be a matrix as opposed to just a straight up single value if the champion is a flex. That makes sense, right?
Hmm.
Cool. Another idea is its strength within the draft. And this is also a matrix because it deals with your own composition as well as the enemy team. So think of this as like a matchup slash team matchup rating, and this is like a synergy rating. All right. And already we're at a large number of things that we're factoring in terms of the strength of a character in a draft. And so when you see those like armchair Reddit analysts like talk about a draft in terms of only this first point, that's part of why I get very frustrated. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, difficulty of execution, especially in our elo, really, really matters. It should not be undervalued. Unless you have like Melee G playing the champion or something, like you don't necessarily want to run a character that is too hard for your player to execute the draft condition of, even if
Hmm.
they're really strong in the meta, even if they're relatively comfortable, but not like super, super comfortable. Like these are things that you need to evaluate on a player by player basis. So, one thing to consider is this card more valuable than another card that does the same thing? So Atrox is not a great example of this, but a good example would be Orin versus Scion. Now these champions do two very different things, right?
Yeah.
Like when you think of them in theory classically, like Scion is more split oriented. He wants to collapse with his ultimate, and then, or like as opposed to be standing in a place with his team and frontlining at the beginning of fights. However, it is possible to play Scion in a way that resembles how Orin is used for the most part in competitive.
Hmm.
But you wouldn't do that, right? Like Scion's value at doing that is lower than Orin's.
Yes.
And Scion's execution cost of doing that is also higher than Orin doing it. Like it's harder to do it with Scion, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So, unless your top laner tells you, like, I am physically incapable of playing the Orin champion, I literally cannot do it, I don't understand why, I'm sorry, pick me Malphite, like you probably wouldn't be choosing a champion other than Orin to do what Orin does, right?
Yeah.
And further, when you're putting together your team and looking at win conditions, to jump back a little bit, looking at what your team is telling you they're capable of playing, sometimes you'll have a player who's like, yeah, I don't really like, I can't play boring champions. I can only play the mechanically intensive champions, blah, 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 right? Like, I don't understand how Orianna works. Give me Yasuo Yone only. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and it might feel like you're boxed in, but generally speaking, that player who has the weakest fun, like, set of options for you to work with is the one that you're going to have to build around in order to create winning situations for your team, provided you're not trying to make it so that your team improves over time.
Okay.
Okay, this has all been very nebulous so far. Like we've been talking about abstract concepts like the entire time. Are you good with me so far?
Yes. Yes.
Cool. Would you like to do a draft and we can talk about the decisions that we make as we do it? It won't be a time one. We're just going to use the draft tool here.
Yeah, sure.
I'll let you pick the side and everything. Would you like to be a Blueberry or a Red Dead Redeemer?
I'll be red.
Okay. And we're doing this based off of the current patch, but I would probably recommend not using Udyr both because he's kind of shit and also because it hasn't really been determined um, what this new Udyr is good at besides 1v1ing.
Yeah, I haven't even looked. I've barely looked at Udyr's abilities, so probably wouldn't pick him.
Alright, so I guess I'll start with the band then, right? And we'll talk about the information that is conveyed by each decision made as we're doing it. Usually I would wait until after the draft, but the point of this is not necessarily to create a winning draft, um, just to discuss the sort of like way that you can go through it logically speaking, right?
Yeah.
So on blue side, I like to grab jungle on one when jungle is powerful, which means that I usually tend to leave AD carry power picks open for the enemy to pick up on red 1-2 with your jungler. And so, depending on what kind of junglers I'm looking at, I may want to limit the AD carry pool in a way where it's easier for me to play the game.
Yeah.
So, for example, not necessarily saying which jungler I'm looking at picking, but I might remove Zeri if she's problematic for what my plan is.
hmm Um, knowing, well, I don't know that you like to pick junglers. Like, I'm trying to think.
Mm-hmm.
Good B1 picks right now are a couple junglers, but also like Seraphine.
Mm-hmm.
So I was either gonna ban Seraphine or maybe I'm trying to think of like good jungle picks right now. Like Wukong is a good blind pick jungler that you can play into most things. So I think I'll ban Seraphine first.
Okay. And one thing you can consider is the likelihood that the other team will ban the champion that you're considering banning. So, for
Yes.
example, Zeri as a blue 1 pick isn't insanely good because on her own, she doesn't necessarily provide more value than a blue 1 jungler would. It's more as a response to information that she has value, so it's better on blue side to ban her than on red. Whereas it's very likely that blue will pick Seraphine on 1 if she's up, so there's low likelihood that I would ban Seraphine, as opposed to Wukong if I'm considering a different jungler on 1, for example.
hmm Well, and that also plays into like if you're drafting against someone and you like look at their team and what they play, if they play Wukong, but if my jungler plays Wukong, and I don't want them to pick Wukong, like I want to either
Mm-hmm.
get it or ban it. I'm gonna wait until the third ban to ban Wukong because they might ban Wukong.
Exactly. For my next ban, continuing with the same logic from that first one, let's go ahead and get rid of Trundle, because that champion really gatekeeps a lot of junglers from being blind picked in the current meta, even though he's more of a counter pick only champion.
Okay. One of the classic like Trundle counter picks or picks that you pick Trundle in is Sejuani, and so like seeing that, my first thought would be like, oh, they want to pick Sejuani, but trying to think like what the meta junglers are right now.
I mean, Trundle fists pretty much all of the meta junglers right
Yeah,
now.
that is true. That is fair. Um, all right. Let me look at a list of junglers.
Sure. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
helpful to have UGG open or something if you're not super familiar with the meta or how champions perform in the elo bracket you're looking at, or if you're not necessarily confident on all of the matchups. Like it's not a bad thing to do to be more informed when you make decisions.
yeah,
Also, usually you ask your players. Like if you're drafting with players, you don't necessarily just like lock shit and like not say anything to them. um, although I've seen that
that's
happen
actually
before.
that's never happened to me, right?
I don't. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know.
And definitely not in finals either.
Oh god.
So, um, all right, I'm trying to think what I'm gonna ban here. Pantheons are really good right now.
Hmm.
I think I'm just gonna ban Pantheon, honestly.
Honestly, not a bad band to be. All right. So I see that you're catching on. That maybe I'm considering a Youngle pick on blue one based on your bans. You're
Yeah.
making pretty good blue one picks in general, since both Seraphine and Pantheon are also pretty disgusting flex picks.
Hmm.
And what I'm thinking now is, am I able to get a ban out of you that you otherwise would not want to do? Can I give you information that may or may not be true that can make you waste resources without wasting my own, right?
Yeah.
So, a great example of me doing this would be to get rid of a jungler that isn't necessarily bad for me to pick, but would be frustrating for what I actually want to pick to deal with. And there is a limited use case of junglers where that's like super true for, um, and see if I can fish out a ban for one of the junglers I'm not considering, basically. This meta,
Yes.
this is not the most practical thing to do just because there are so many options, but it's something worth talking about, so I figured I would cover it.
Okay. And seeing the Wukong ban, um, I'm trying to like you're telling me stuff, and I'm trying to think about it in a way without you like knowing the things that you're telling me. You know, because I you wouldn't be telling me this stuff if we were actually drafting.
Sure. I mean, like, even like some of these things you can maybe infer, right? Like most people who are drafting rationally, which is not most people you will draft against, would be, if you're drafting against somebody you know knows what they're doing when they're doing draft, the Zeri ban, like the logic that I gave you for the Zeri ban, would be something that you would think of. But if it's
Yeah.
somebody emotional doing draft, then it's a little different. It's like, oh, maybe they just hate playing against Zeri, they're mental blocked against it or something. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Definitely.
So you can use some of what I'm saying in your own deliberations. You can assume that you know the person that you're drafting against in this case, since we're just talking about theory right now.
Yeah. I'm thinking like Volibear right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just because I think Wukong is good into Volibear.
I think Volibear is a great ban in response to the Wukong ban, actually, especially since
Yeah.
Trundle also fists Volley,
Hmm.
and Volley is also bad into Zeri.
Yeah.
Is that what
So
you want
yeah, I
then?
think I'll just go with Volley.
Sounds good.
It's not as strong, but it's still like I mean its role hasn't really changed. Like you run
Agreed.
at people, CC them early. It's still strong early, and
It
it's easy to play. So
absolutely. It's still like a pickable jungler who the value that they create as a flex pick technically, as a jungler in general, and with regards to the matchups that I've been banning, like it makes a lot of sense to get rid of.
yeah, well, it's one of those junglers like right now. I'd say like only half the junglers are like viable, especially in like pro play, just
Mm-hmm.
because of clear speed difference. And Volibear is one of those junglers that has a fast clear and then can get out of the map and actually do stuff. And so that's why, like, even with the nerfs on volley, I still think it's a really good pick.
Okay, we're gonna enter one of my favorite lines to draft. I've done this line a lot, and we'll talk it as we go through. I like to pick this champion on blue one when the champion pool permits, and the champion pool only permits if the champion is a flex. But
Yeah,
if the champion is a flex and you can send him jungle mid and bot lane, then he's kind of very disgusting. And he
yeah,
still
because like,
fits in with the ideas that I was banning for, where Wukong Trundle give him like a hard time in the jungle, and matching up with Zeri in the bot lane is not necessarily super fun, even though you push her under early.
yeah. Well, and another thing is like, Karthus isn't really like meta right now, I would say. And so, like, if I was drafting on the other side, if you put that B1, I would have no idea what to do after that because it's just like a super random. It just random pick that you just drop in.
Mm.
I have no idea. Like you said, I have no idea where it's going either, and so it's hard to play into.
I would say
Um,
also this champion is not meta like in solo queue more because like it when you lock it, there's like a pretty likelihood that you know where it's going. But in competitive, it's still super valuable, and pros don't play it more because of stubbornness than because it's actually bad.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think in response to that, I would, I guess not even really like in response, but just like in general. I actually don't know. I was thinking about just drafting Sivir because Sivir's really strong here, but
Mhm.
there are like counters to Sivir.
Yeah.
Like I know Twitch and Draven are both really good into Sivir. At least that's what I've heard. I'm not, I don't play bot lane, so
Oh, well, I can confirm
well,
that both of those champions are pretty frustrating for Sivir. Sivir, in general, is not super strong in the early game like she used to be. She's more of like a 2-3 item scaler now, and she's
yeah.
just really strong when she hits those items. So champions who would abuse her early and do it without poking her out with spells specifically are going to be the strongest at that.
Mm, yeah, that makes sense. Um, I, I'm gonna I'm gonna lock in. You know what? I'm gonna lock in Lucian Nami.
Okay, so
The reason I do that, like one of the reasons is, like you said, like Karthus could go bot. I feel like that kind of eliminates Karthus going bot because if Karthus went bot, Lucian Nami would just like absolutely shit on it. Like I don't think Karthus can really do anything into that lane.
this entirely depends on the support matchup at this point, but there are
Yeah.
ways that Karthus can handle bot lanes like this. Like one of my favorite drills to do with like bot lanes when I'm working with a team is to make them do, and this is going to sound really horrible, but I like to make them do Karthus versus Draven and then have support matchups that are neutral but engage tanks. And the Karthus runs exhaust, and the goal is Karthus should win it every time, regardless of
Okay.
which player is playing it. Lucian
Yeah.
Nami is a little different because Lucian Nami explodes your entire life bar in less than a second, and that's kind of the point.
Mm, yeah.
Um, but when it comes to matchups like that for Karthus, generally you match him with a poke support and they just outrange.
Yeah. That makes sense.
All of that is to say, you can still run the Karthus bot lane if you want to. Um, and I will decide whether or not I want to do that in this phase, probably. But I may not actually show that.
Yeah.
You've picked support. Having support counterpick is really nice for
hmm
me. And I'm pretty confident that you're either going to pick jungle on 3 where you're going to pick a flex between jungle mid, top jungle, or all three of them on 3. Um, so I'm pretty comfy anticipating where the draft is going to go from here. Also, you've given me a pretty good idea of the range of your composition, right?
Yeah.
Um, you're pretty comfortable like mid-range fighting. Like I could pick champions to outrange you at this point, or I could pick champions of a comparable range. But at this point, unless I'm picking high burst, I'm not looking to pick champions of a lower range than Lucian Nami, which is pretty feasible.
Yeah.
You're also telling me that with this, you're looking to skirmish. Your champions are early to mid game oriented, their team fighting is going to be relatively strong, and you're probably going to look for further champions that um, overlap with that idea. Probably your red 3 pick is going to be an engager before I can limit that pool. And I need to make a choice now whether I want to pick disengage or whether I want to match your engage and look to create a team fight that's favorable for me.
hmm
So that all makes sense.
Yeah, that
That
makes sense.
when you see that, like the response picks, especially in phase one, you should be narrowing in on which of your team's win condition you want to play to. We didn't
Yeah.
pick a win condition at the start of this, we're just doing this purely theoretically. But
hmm
it's still helpful for us to think about those things we talked about before, right?
Yes.
So for me, after going through all of that and thinking about um, Nami. I'm slightly sad that Seraphine is banned. I won't lie to you, because it would be really nice to pick here.
Yeah.
However, I'm not stressed too much about it. One matchup I really like in particular for dissuading combat, um, and having like a mid-game skirmishing idea to match like early pressure from things like Lucian Nami without necessarily having to get priority over them is Renata Glask. I think that is pretty like sensible, right?
Hmm.
And another thing that I like to do when I see um, a composition taking place that requires certain things, right? Is to
Yeah.
pick characters who um, work against the things that you need to pick in a way where it dissuades you from picking the things that you're intentionally picking and therefore reducing synergy for you, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So in this case, I have options and all of the options are kind of mediocre. Like I could pick Poppy here on blue 3 and it would have some merits, but there is risk to it. I could pick a champion like uh, Vigor, and it would be similar, where I would have strong dissuasion of things that would be problematic to you, but also it comes at the risk of I can either put it in a bad matchup in the bot lane with Renata Glask and pray to God that they don't get run over, or I can put it mid lane and give you the opportunity to counterpick it. So neither
Yeah.
of these sound particularly appealing to me, but it's something that is going to occur to me when I'm doing this, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
I think with everything that I've said, what would be easiest would be to pick Caitlyn. Because Caitlyn will allow me to either interact or not interact with your bot lane, depending on how we're feeling. It works well with the Renata Glask. It's a classic Lucian counterpick, and it's also a lot stronger this patch after the buffs. It's
Okay.
also fairly
Yeah.
synergistic with my Karthus, which could be jungle or mid, you don't know yet.
Hmm.
So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. I'm gonna lock in Sejuani.
Okay. You wanna walk me through it?
So the reason I'm doing this is, like you said, Sejuani, you can flex it, jungle, top. It provides tank. It provides well frontline. It provides CC. Uh, and because you don't know like if it's going top or jungle yet, you might waste bans, like we talked about earlier.
It makes sense to me. Now, one other thing that we should talk about. This Lucian pick is technically a flex too. You can send it mid top.
True. Yeah.
Now, do you want to do that? You don't have to decide
Uh,
right now, but it's
I'm
something
gonna
that you should keep
yes.
in mind
I'm gonna
because
keep
red
it. I'm
bands.
yeah. I'm keeping it as a flex pick.
Mm-hmm. Good, 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 good. So, red band phase. It goes red band, blue band, red pick. So you get
Okay.
to ban next.
I'm gonna ban Poppy.
You're gonna ban Poppy. Is it because I hovered it?
No, it's
Okay,
not because you hovered it. I actually was gonna ban it.
great. You wanna walk me through the logic?
Um. Well, I don't want to give up the picks that I'm looking at, but Poppy is good into Sejuani because Poppy has or Sejuani has a dash.
Mm-hmm.
Good
And Lucian as
Lucian.
well. Yeah.
Lucian has a dash, so like it's already good into my comp.
Mm-hmm.
And if I want to pick champions that have dashes in the next my next couple picks, then it's just good. Also, Poppy's just strong right now
Mm-hmm.
in the jungle, so it's just good to get it off the board.
Sure. All right. I need to limit you in some ways now. You already have pretty strong amounts of engage, and I already have some fairly vulnerable characters. Um, my expectation is that you're going to want to not collapse your flex between for Sejuani between jungle mid top, although it's most likely to be top and jungle. And so the most value I can create is by banning mid laners that would
Hmm.
interact with my composition in a way that I don't want. Right.
Yep. Yeah.
So with that in mind, um, I have to get rid of Swain.
Yeah.
Because red 4 Swain is just kind of really hard for me to do anything with.
Yes. Um. I'm looking at banning mid laners too. Like a mid laner, or I could further get the jungle
Actually,
pulled
I
down.
think you should ban in a way. There's two ways you can approach this that are really good. You can ban in a way to make me make conclusions about your flexes that are not true, or you can
Hmm.
ban what would be the most effective at preventing your composition from the lane that you know I haven't picked yet, which is top lane.
Okay. Yeah.
Either branch is viable.
I'm thinking. In my mind, so like you have no like front line right now, and you have
That's right.
no really engage,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think I'm gonna ban Ornn.
Right. Yeah, Ornn is a great ban here, especially considering I was considering it, but also just because since you have that a guaranteed counter pick sense, it works really well with my composition, which is already shaping up to be a disengaged composition. Like, it's
Yeah.
just really, really painful pick for you to have to deal with. All
Hmm.
right, I got rid of Swain. I need to get rid of another mid laner that would be problematic for my team to deal with. You have a melee champion, and Aurelia just got buffed, and it's kind of a flex pick, and also it's really disgusting to my team. So I think I'm gonna get rid of Aurelia too, and that's sort of forced.
Yeah.
If you pick
Um.
if you pick a win shitter, it's kind of unlucky, but you can make it work.
uh, I'm gonna pick Silas.
Silas, fascinating. I like the Silas Red Fort Flex actually for a couple of reasons, but why don't you walk me through why you like it?
I mean, like you just said, Silas is a melee champion. Synergy with the Sejuani.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it can be flexed to top as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's very matchup dependent. So like depends on what you pick.
Sure.
So like I have so many options right now, and I'm just gonna choose based on what you pick. Like I could send Sejuani jungle and Silas top. I could send Sejuani jungle and Silas mid. I could send Sejuani top and Silas mid. I have a lot of options. Another reason is it gives me more engage and dive,
Mm-hmm.
and I already am like I have a lot of dive and engage right now,
Sure.
and so like those are all the reasons.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about flexes and things that you can do with flexes that are pretty cool from blue side. I know for sure, seeing your draft, I'm gonna pick Set. I don't know where I'm gonna send Set yet, but I know
Yeah.
for sure I'm gonna pick him. And the idea behind this is that now, okay, I know Silas has to go to a solo lane, right?
Hmm.
I know for sure that Set is very happy in a solo lane against Silas, regardless of which one he ends up being in, right?
Yeah.
Um, I also know that Set Ultimate isn't insanely like strong for Silas to steal. So the value that this set is giving me is greater than the value that the set is giving you.
Okay. Yeah.
The other thing that I can do is I can pick other characters who, with that value, like if I have the ability to duo flex and pick like a mid and a top, or a jungle and a like mid top, you see what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, I can create a situation where like it isn't until champ select that things are actually determinate. The only problem is the best choice for that right now is Mordekaiser, and that's a horrible choice.
Yeah.
So it may just be that I pick Set, he has a good matchup or he doesn't, and I pick a mid laner and they have a good matchup or they don't, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I'm kind of edgy, so I don't think I will do that. So the thing about Set Atrox is that they're both fairly comfortable in mid lane matchups in the meta right now. You can pick something to make one of them suffer, right? But it's
Yeah.
not the end of the world, and they're going to bridge for my Karthus jungle, which you now know is Karthus jungle just fine.
Hmm. I'm thinking.
It's not a Cassio B5 angle, Lishan. You're actually crazy. Picking Cassio into Sejuani Lucian. Yes,
Yeah.
she interrupts their dashes, but they just kill her from out of her range.
So
We know this, and we don't know anything else. Sorry, I was keeping the map.
yeah, I'm at this point. I'm sending Silas mid, and I'm either picking a jungler or a top laner.
Oh, you're for sure sending Silas mid now, no matter what.
Yes,
Why is that?
actually, you know what? Maybe I'm not. What one thing I'm like thinking is I need more wave clear,
Mm-hmm.
and so like I could. I'm actually thinking like maybe locking in like Gangplank here.
Oh, I see. Interesting choice.
Another thought was Mordekaiser.
Mm-hmm.
Just because that matchup into Set and Aatrox is like it's good into Aatrox and it's like fine into Set.
Mm-hmm. It's
Although
it's
I think it's good into Set.
it's the sort of thing where, at the very least, resources would be required to make it like straight up favorable against Mordekaiser.
Yeah. So um, with that, Sejuani would be going in the jungle.
Mm-hmm. And Silas would be going mid.
Yes, and Styles would be going mid. Or maybe not. Mordekaiser could be flexed mid.
Mm.
Um, as for like junglers, I was thinking like if I wanted to send Sejuani top, I would pick uh either. See, my personal preference is kind of like impacting it now.
I know who I would pick in this situation.
I'm thinking like Xin Zhao. Actually, wait, Kane might be good.
So here's what I'm thinking. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm thinking that this Sejuani and Descartes jungle is acceptable. I'm
Yeah.
thinking that you send the Lucian bot lane
Mhm.
because Lucian into either of these matchups is like tumultuous but fine, and the jungle matchup is not likely to make it like bad. But you are picking Lucian Nomi in a situation where like picking another bot laner with like and having Lucian slot in with like Silas Sejuani topside makes your team composition a little bit unlucky if you run into the Renata Glass ultimate at a bad time.
Yeah.
I think that you send the Silas mid lane and accept whatever the matchup is, and you pick Fiora, and you send Fiora top lane, and you send Sejuani top lane in whichever matchup she gets, and whichever matchup Silas gets, unlucky. And the reason that I think this is that while some of the other picks that you were considering, like Mordekaiser, for example, are good in both matchups and they create a lot of pressure for your team, I don't think that they fit with the win condition that your team has already established, where they're looking for at least 4v4 skirmishing. Um, and I think that the Fiora provides you with a sort of 1-4 skirmish like angle that's stronger than the other options would present you with.
Yeah.
Because my team is already very like confirmed, like we are trying to 5v5 fight you, right? Like all of my
Mhm.
champions want to be in one location, so making
Yeah.
it so that one of them has to leave is the strongest option.
Okay.
So that's why I would make that choice. If the Mordekaiser pick is your thing, like that's completely fine. If the Gangplank pick is your thing, that's also functions in a way similar to Fiora, but it's more passive, and I'm a
Yeah.
person who prefers active lines, so it's like, it is what it
Uh-huh.
is. But that's how I would win on Red 5 in this draft.
Okay. I like the Fiora. I like GP just because he has the ability to impact the team fight, even
Mm-hmm.
if in a side lane.
Yeah.
with his ultimate, and so and also like that does provide wave clear. But
Yeah,
the like one problem is he's probably not going to be with the team
sure.
to do that wave clear.
You also have wave clear.
Yeah,
You don't have wave clear that's as good, but you have much better
not as
engage, so you
good.
can dissuade my team from wave clearing in a way that's actually problematic for you.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Also,
I
you're
guess
a lot
I
better
was
at
kind of
drafting than you made it sound like when we started talking.
really.
Yeah, like pretty much everything we talked about rationally. Like, sure, there was no clock, but like the way that you were thinking about the game was pretty good. So I don't think you should be red five Tryndamere angle. Shut up, Ishan. Yeah, no, he's right though. But Tryndamere would also be fine.
Yeah, yeah. So like you said, Fjord's good. I like Gangplank here too. Yeah,
Yeah, cool. So the trick is now, right? We have to do that while under the pressure of a clock with limitations on champion pool and while balancing the temperament of players who may or may not complain regardless of whether the draft is actually good.
yeah,
And that's where all of the things that we've talked about kind of come together. So we just did this nice, beautiful theoretical draft, and I like it, and I think your draft is winning, um, which is lovely to see, like as we talked through it. But the actual application of this to teams in like VAD or in other like Goldilo things, you're not going to see drafts that look like this. And part of that is going to be remembering that those cards have more than just the number for pure draft strength, right?
yeah.
So we could do like a draft where we like pull VAD players, but we've already been going at it for like 80 minutes. And
Hmm.
that's a lot of information for you to take in. So I
Yeah,
think I'd like
sure.
to call it here. I wouldn't want to like burn you out, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So let's wrap up. If you have any questions or if chat has any questions, please feel free to ask. You can always ask later, but it won't be on the stream if you do. Um, so I prefer you ask them now, but I will always answer them if you send them direct message wise.
I don't think I have any questions. Like I think I understand it, and I guess I did learn like a lot and got like things clarified that I kind of already knew, but like you clarified for me.
It's been my experience that's what usually happens with these things. People don't usually learn something they don't know, they just have like a more solid understanding of the things they already knew.
Yeah.
Does yeah, it looks like chat is also devoid of questions at this time, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up the stream. Y'all have a wonderful evening.